How are y'all doing? My name's Luke Panzarella, and today we're going to be tying a game changer with a new EP practical brush. This one's just the first rendition I did in black and purple. For demonstration purposes, this one will just be straight black with a pink marabou tail. But yeah, that's the first rendition. Let's get to it. So, I'm going to start off with a articulated fish spine tail shank. And you know, this is just good for a real compact short tail section, just to get the fly started here. So I'll take one of those and I'll secure it in the very tip of my tying vise. And I'm using a 6/0 unithread in purple. So I'll start my base in the middle of this shank here and work my way back. I'm going to start with this tie-in super far back. It's just a little tuft of pink marabou, a hot pink. And I'll kind of fan it out here to kind of mimic an undulating tail. A little bit better mark it, and then I'll tie it in here. Bite that down real good. I'll take my marabou here and I'll come up and I'll spin it into a little rope. That way when I cut off, I get the maximum amount of all that excess off to kind of build a nice thread ramp down, just make everything a little bit easier. Take a couple wraps at the front. And I'm going to start off with the practical brush in that 0.5 inch in black here. I'll take my piece and I'll come and tie it in from the wire. I'll come all the way back with that, just to maximize that coverage when I wrap it. And with my nail clippers. Alright. And we'll start our wraps here. I'll use the rotary function on my vise just to aid me in this a little bit. Just kind of helps when you're making those touching wraps to know where you're wrapping down on. Make it a little bit more compact. We'll wrap as close to the eye of that tail shank as possible, and I'll come up and I'll split my fibers, just so when I wrap down on that wire, it gives me a little bit more of a direct point of impact, and I'm not building as much bulk up at the front here. And I'll hold it with my index finger. Bob and weave that thread in. Couple tight wraps on top. Move it back here. Couple in front. Take my nail clippers and come in close with them. Secure that down and I'll whip finish. Like a 4 or 5 turn whip finish here. Ideally, if you're going to be fishing this fly pretty heavy, I would recommend obviously applying some adhesive to these thread wraps up front, but just for demonstration purposes, I'm not going to be doing that today. Come in and clip that off. And I'll leave this first portion in my vise, just so when I apply the next shank, it'll just make life a whole lot easier. And that's going to be this articulated fish spine by Flyman in that 10 millimeter right there. Alright, well, once that's locked in, I'll take my bodkin and I'll come through and I'll just pluck out any of these errant or trapped fibers that I had when I wrapped this in. We'll do this all the way up and down the fly. And I'll wrap back here as far as I possibly can, while at the same time giving this shank room to kind of move, and this will give that fly that effect that you want when you're fishing a game changer, mimicking that vertebrae, that prey, that bait fish. And I'm going to come in again and I'm going to wrap a following section up with that 0.5 in black. Alright, and we're going to follow up with that, and we're going to add another 10 millimeter shank, and that's going to kind of extend this tail section here into the middle of our body. And what we're doing here is basically just building the taper of this fly. Put that next shank in and pluck out all your errant fibers. Alright, in our next section we're going to step up in size just a hair to that 0.75 inch, same color black. That's just going to build it up. We're coming from here, we're going to work out and bevel this fly out. And that gives us a good rough outline when we're trimming to kind of follow a shape. So I'll close this shank up here and alright, and then I'm going to come through again after that whip finish and just pluck all these fibers out here. The next in line comes my 15 millimeter articulated fish spine. This guy right there. And I'm going to come in, and I'm going to go with that 0.75 inch practical brush now, continuing what I started on that last section of that 10 millimeter shank. Alright, now I'm going to come in again, another 15 millimeter shank. Alright, and on this one, I'm going to increase that taper and build it up. I'm going to bump up to that 1 inch. Alright, so at this point right here, this is the extent to my shanks. So as you can kind of see, I started with a tail shank, 2 10 millimeter shanks, 2 15 millimeter shanks up to here. And then we're going to attach this to the hook and get to the meat. Alright, so now that we've finished up with this back end of the fly, so to speak, we're going to attach it to our hook. So in this circumstance, I'm going to be using this BN5X baitfish stinger hook and a 2/0. It's a cool little hook. It's got like a little pinch in the bend, a shorter shank, and it, I don't know, better hook for most of your baitfish applications. So I'm going to secure that in my vise. And then I'm going to take some of this 40-pound wire bite, and this is going to act as my articulation wire. You can use a really stiff monofilament or anything compatible to that, but you just got to make sure you lock it down real good. So I'm going to start my thread base. And I'm going to come in from the top. I'm going to lock this in real good. make sure when you fold this over that your tail end is going to align right with the body. So if you tied it all the way down here and flipped it over, it would kind of linger off to the bottom end. So we're just going to make sure it's nice and even. And like I said, you're going to lock this down real good. Last thing you want is for your work to fly off in the middle of your back cast. So it'll even come up under the wire too. Couple real tight wraps. Now that that's in there, you want to identify the top end and the bottom end of your back piece here. So I'm just going to feel for the foot of that tail shank, and that's going to be my bottom. So I'm going to come up through the hook eye of the shank this way. And I'm going to create a little loop right there. Basically that's going to act as my last section of articulation. And I'll pinch that down to the size where I want it. You want to get it pretty close, but you also want to, allow it room to move. And we're going to tie that in here. This is the section you really want to make sure you lock down. So you see, I still have allowed myself room for this back end of the fly to move around. It's not too tight where it's restricting movement. So that's what you kind of want, that's what you're looking for right there. So I'm going to come up the top here and just really pull down hard on this and make sure that it is locked in. Every thread wrap I take is super tight. Alright, and I'll wrap back here. So that's basically what I'm up to so far. So now I'm going to take my biggest section, or my biggest chunk of that practical brush, which is that 1.25 inch, that length and diameter right there. And I'm going to start way towards the back. And I'm going to wrap up halfway up my body with this. And what that's going to do, it's going to give that middle of that head a bevel. So it's going to kind of just allow my taper to be facilitated a lot easier. So I'll just tie this in. Same principle as earlier, where you're just touching wraps and making sure those fibers are nice and preened back. Alright, now that I've reached my halfway point here, I'm going to tie this section of the 1 1/4 inch brush off. That should have achieved our bevel that we were going for, maybe a little half wrap right there. Split the fibers, come down, hold it with your index finger, and tie that brush off. Alright, now I'm going to come through at the end with my 1 inch, build up a little dense, shorter head right there. going to wrap this all the way up until we're just shy of the eye of the hook. You want to give yourself a little bit of room just to build a smaller thread head there, just so you can hold some adhesive there and you're not crowding the eye of the hook, just making the fly overall look a little bit more clean. So at this point, the tying portion of this fly is done. So what I'm doing here is I'm just picking out the fibers up for the body on the shank of the hook. And I'm going to get ready to trim and put my eyes on this fly and finish it. Alright, so what I'm going to do here before the trimming process, I'm just going to kind of pluck everything in the order that I want it. So flow the top fibers up, flow the under fibers the opposing way, and kind of split the middle. And what that does, it doesn't create a whole lot of bulk right in the middle. So what that's going to do, it's going to allow me to have a slim side profile, yet at the same time, the fly is going to be compact. What I'm doing here is I'm just creating pockets for my eyes. So when I push my eye down, this material doesn't flare upwards. And I always like to glue my eyes on before my trimming process, just because it gives me a little bit of an outline. And it just kind of helps you achieve that shape that you want. So my eyes of choice today are going to be these EP plastic eyes. This is in a 6 millimeter in white. So these EP eyes are going to come with a post. I just take my nail clippers and I'll come all the way down flush to the back end of the eye and I'll clip it off. That'll just help me glue it on a little bit easier. Alright, so we are going to, like I was saying, just come through with a couple fine adjustments where we're going to put our eyes. But yeah, so the benefits of gluing on your eyes before is just it's going to hold all of these fibers that are preened upwards, and all the ones down, they're going to keep them down. So that's going to facilitate our trimming here. So I'm going to start with putting on both of my eyes before I do any trimming. So to help from getting super glue absolutely everywhere and kind of screwing up the look of your fly, I'm going to apply it to the eye itself, and then from there put it onto the fly. So I'm going to take a little bit of this Zap Gel and add a little bead to the underside of my eye here. Alright, so now that I've got both of my eyes asphyxiated, we're going to begin the trimming process. So I'm going to start with leaving my flying device here, and I'm going to come up from the top and just kind of round off this head in a very, very rough shape. Obviously I'm going to, go in more than that, but this is just to outline my rough shape here. So we're just going to trim until we get our correct profile that we want. And this all depends on what you want to do and, how you want to fish this fly. I kind of like a little bulkier head to push a little bit more water. But a lot of other guys like to fish these a little slimmer. But yeah, so that's where we're going to start on here. And I might take the fly out of the vise and kind of mess around with it that way. But so obviously you don't have to trim it super drastically, but that's basically that fly. Yeah, just that little game changer. I thought I'd tie it a little longer than this guy. I just kind of like that profile, but yeah, man, great tarpon, snook, redfish, great all around cool fly.